What are the creepiest urban legends from your area? Story 1. The Slap Ghost. In a nearby village, there's a story about a particular road through the woods where several people reported being slapped while riding their bicycles in the late 1970s. It always happened at night. One of those people was my grandfather. He was alone, got slapped, and fell off his bicycle. No one was there. Several people came home with bruises and scratches from falling off their bikes after being slapped in the face. Suddenly, the slap stopped for a few years. But in the 1980s, the ghost came back. A young man was slapped in the same spot. The strange part is that the mystery was solved that very night. It turned out to be a branch from a tree. The older folks from the 70s used to come home late from the village bar, often heavily intoxicated, including my grandfather. With no source of light, they'd ride into the branch, get hit, and fall. Once the tree was trimmed, the slap stopped. Years later, the branch had grown back, and the guy in the 80s became the next victim. Lucky for him, he was sober and realized what had actually hit him. Story 2. There used to be an abandoned psychiatric facility near my house in the 1970s. It was probably 5 minutes away, if that. They tore it down in the 1990s because it had become an eyesore and carried a dark history of mistreatment. There's a cemetery on the property with hundreds of unnamed individuals who passed away there. In the early 2000s, a major retail chain purchased the land and planned to build a store there. Since it would have been visible from the highway, they began excavation, but the night before construction was set to begin, a massive landslide occurred. It blocked the highway for days. If it had happened during rush hour, it could have resulted in many casualties. In the end, it was deemed unsafe to build on, so the area remains empty, except for the bike trails that run through it, but no one ever rides through at night. I guess those who passed away there weren't interested in spending eternity under aisle 10. Story 3. There's one story I'm actually connected to. I had a friend in 3rd grade. He was a great kid, and we shared a lot of interests. He always sat with me at lunch and played with me during recess. One day, he started acting strangely. He said there were bugs in his brain. I asked if he was okay, but he never responded. That day, I didn't see him at lunch or recess, and he didn't come to school for the next 3 days. I asked our teacher what had happened, and she just said, "It's not your business." I never saw him again. Afterwards, some of the other kids began making up stories about him running into the woods and drowning in a lake, or being kidnapped by someone who had escaped from prison. As his friend, I was hurt by those rumors. He meant a lot to me. Now, 10 years later, the local kids still repeat these myths. It's strange to think that children who were infants back then are still talking about him like he's part of some urban legend. None of them know the real story. I don't either. But I do know that I was his friend, and those legends are far from the truth. Story 4. We had a local legend called Joey the Clown. Nearby, there's an old Victorian-era railway that was transformed into a 20-mile walking and biking path. Before it was paved, it was just mud, grass, and old tunnels with no gates or lighting. The tunnels were pitch dark. As kids, we used to hang out there. That's when we first heard the legend. Joey was supposedly a runaway from a traveling circus. The story goes that he kidnapped a child and suspended them upside down from one of the pipes in the tunnel, right in the path of an oncoming train, and then jumped in front of it himself. Rumors still persist that his ghost haunts the tunnels. They say if you enter at night, you might hear him laughing, hear a baby cry, and even hear the train. My mom used the story to her advantage when I was young. She'd say Joey targeted kids who wore mismatched socks or didn't put on clean underwear. Naturally, my siblings and I always made sure we were properly dressed when we went near the railway. Story 5. There was a homeless man in Bear, Vermont. I met him once, but I can't remember his name. He looked about 40, rough around the edges, and wasn't quite all there, but he wasn't drunk or anything. He might have just been mentally exhausted from past drug use. People in town believed his family was actually wealthy, and that he was only staying in shelters to make a statement after a falling out with his father about a mysterious death in the family decades ago. Locals claimed he was incredibly intelligent and even knew Shakespeare by heart. There was a rumor that he only pretended to be unstable. He had a strange nickname, something like the Dancing Daddy, because he would do a little dance whenever someone gave him change. Even though he didn't say much, people in town both feared and respected him just based on his reputation. Story 6. There was a colonel who founded a town a couple of hours south of my hometown in the 1700s. He had an affair with a young woman, and when she became pregnant, he kicked her out of town. She raised their son alone for several years. When she returned and begged him for help raising their child, he publicly accused her of being a witch and had her executed by burning. After the execution, as they were taking her body away, her son tried to retrieve her remains so she could be buried on his property. He attempted to pull her body by the leg, but it snapped off due to how badly scorched it was. He took the leg and said it would be buried near his home. Before leaving, he told the colonel, his biological father, that he hoped his memory would always be stained by what he had done to the woman. After the colonel's death, a tomb was built for him, but overnight a leg-shaped stain appeared on its surface. People tried to clean it off, but it wouldn't go away. Eventually, the stone was replaced entirely, only for an identical stain to reappear in the exact same place. The mark is still there today and has become a local tourist attraction. Story 7. My high school had a few local legends before it became a school. It was a convent and Catholic boarding school. On our first day, older students gave us tours and shared some of the stories. One of them involved the main entrance. To reach the reception desk, you had to pass a statue of the Virgin Mary. Behind it, there was a rope. It was said that one of the nuns had taken her own life using that very rope. Outside the front of the school was an old well and a non-functional fountain. The well had been sealed and was impossible to peer into. The story went that a girl once fell down the well, and the nuns were unable to rescue her. After she passed away, the well was permanently closed. The teachers' offices, off limits to students without permission, were on the top floor. That area had once served as the nuns' sleeping quarters. It was said that people could still see or hear the spirits of the nuns who had lived there. Another story came from a place where I worked. Before becoming a retail store, the building had been a garage. The original owner reportedly died by suicide on the property. Several people have claimed to see or hear his presence in the basement. Story 8. In a nearby town, there's a tree known as the Devil's Tree. It never grows leaves, it has been dead for years and still hasn't fallen. It was once the site of multiple tragic events, including several lynchings, and is believed by some to be connected to something very dark. Snow never settles around the base of the tree, and attempts to remove it have always failed. It's said that anyone who disrespects the tree meets a terrible fate. One story involved an 18-year-old football player who, while out with friends, thought it would be funny to urinate on the tree. On their way home, he sped down the road and suddenly lost his headlights. He crashed and didn't survive. I can't say for sure what's true, but I've seen the tree with my own eyes. It's real, snow doesn't collect around it, and it still stands. Dead as ever, the tree is the only tree in a wide open field. People still wonder why it hasn't been removed, until they remember why. Story 9. I live in the Victorian Alpine region of Australia. With the mountains and cooler climate, we get a lot of people coming up to camp. There are rumors about a man known as the Button Man. The story goes that some people have woken up to find pictures of this man lying next to them inside their tents, photos taken with their own phones. Normally, I wouldn't believe such stories, since things like that could be easily faked. But once, I was on an overnight hike with two friends. It was late and one of us clearly heard footsteps outside the tent. I called out to our other friend, who was in a separate tent. Suddenly, the footsteps sprinted away. I got up, scanned the area with a flashlight, but found nothing. We checked on our friend and found him still asleep. Shaken, we stayed awake the rest of the night, but nothing else happened. In the morning, we found no new photos or signs of anyone having been there, but the footsteps were too human to ignore. Besides that, there have been 2 cases of campers, unrelated to each other, going missing at night, only for their bodies to be found later in the snow gum forests. Most assume it was due to hypothermia. Still, people wonder if it might somehow be connected to the Button Man. Story 10. Here in the Czech Republic, we have many urban legends, like infected needles hidden in public transport seats or razor blades glued to water slides at water parks. But there are 2 stories that stuck with me since childhood. The first is about the black ambulance. They say you can see it at night or during the evening. I was told it kidnaps children who are alone and sells their organs on the black market. That story terrified me growing up. The second story is from my old hometown. It was a tale from the area of Vadis in Benishov district. I wish I could remember the name of the book it came from. According to the story, a gibbet was built on a nearby hill where women accused of witchcraft were executed. One of their spirits never left and is said to haunt the hill to this day. I used to panic every time I had to pass by that place. My grandmother once told me about someone who claimed to have seen the witch, which only made it worse. I still get uneasy thinking about it. Story 11. I grew up in a rural place without many legends. When I was young, a teenager near our house died in a car accident. It wasn't an uncommon kind of crash for someone her age. She hit a tree, but some said she did so while trying to avoid a dog, a large black dog with an unusually long tail, according to some descriptions. People around said an old man had mistreated a dog years ago, and the creature now haunted the area seeking revenge. It was said that seeing the dog predicted either death or great fortune. My brother used to tell me stories about the big black dog. I didn't really believe them until I saw it for myself. Back in high school, I had a close friend who came with me everywhere. When we explored the woods near my house, we always took the family dogs. It was a rural area, so we let them off leash, expecting them to stay nearby. If they ever saw or heard anything unusual, they would absolutely alert us. One time we were heading to the creek when I heard a rustle in the fall leaves. I watched a massive black dog with a ridiculously long tail cross the road, crash through the leaves, and vanish into the woods. None of my dogs reacted at all. I knew if I had seen and heard that dog, they would have too. But they didn't even acknowledge it, and my dogs were highly territorial. They'd chase anything, a dog, rat, rabbit, you name it. I thought maybe I was hallucinating, until my friend turned to me and asked if I had just seen that enormous black dog cross our path and why none of the dogs reacted. It was surreal. It was even more unsettling to have someone else confirm what I saw. The only other time I walked that path since, we heard coyotes start howling nearby, and we turned around immediately. I haven't wanted to go near that area again. Story 12. I live next to a bridge that has been a known suic spot since the late 1880s, when the country was first industrializing. The story goes that during the early days of an armed conflict, when an invasion was beginning to look likely, many single mothers, having already lost their partners, feared what might happen if the area fell. The fear of brutality and loss led some of them to take their children to the top of the bridge and jump with them, believing it was the only way to preserve their dignity and spare their children from witnessing defeat. According to legend, dozens of women did this, and the local authorities didn't intervene, possibly because they sympathized with their situation. Today, the bridge is still referred to as the Suic Bridge. In the 5 years I've lived here, there have been 4 known Suics, 2 of which I witnessed. I've called emergency services 5 times to report people stopping on the bridge, whether on foot, bike, or in a car. In 2 of those cases, I helped prevent someone from going over the barrier. The worst case I witnessed involved someone who decided against jumping and chose a different method. They tied a rope to a support beam and around their neck. From what I saw below, alerted by people screaming, the rope had been too long, and the knots held tighter than their body could endure. The noose was still swinging, but empty, and there were 2 distinct impact points on the road. Story 13. There's a house back home that's said to be haunted by a sinister presence and a woman's spirit. It was turned into a haunted attraction in 2010, but before that, it sat behind a gate for years and was deeply unsettling to look at. According to the Wikipedia page for Loftus Hall, Charles Tottenham became Lord of the Manor in 1752 after marrying Anne Loftus, daughter of the first Viscount Loftus. They had 6 children, 4 boys and 2 girls, Elizabeth and Anne. When Anne Loftus died while the children were young, Charles remarried his cousin Jane Cliff. They lived together with Anne, his daughter, at Loftus Hall. One evening in 1775, Charles, his second wife, and Anne were at home while the rest of the family was away. A storm rolled in, and a ship docked at the Hook Peninsula, not far from the mansion. A young man from the ship was welcomed into the house. He and Anne grew close. One night, the family and the young man were playing cards in the game room. Each player was dealt 3 cards except Anne, who only received 2. A butler was about to say something when Anne bent down to pick up a card from the floor. It said that when she looked under the table, she saw that the young man had a cloven foot. She stood up and shouted that he had a cloven foot, at which point he disappeared through the ceiling, leaving a large hole. Anne became mentally unwell after this. The family, ashamed, locked her in her favorite room, the tapestry room, where she stayed, looking out the window toward the sea, waiting for the stranger's return. She refused food and water, and eventually died in that room later in 1775. It's said that her body had stiffened in the sitting position, and she was buried just like that. Story 14. I live on the outskirts of Berlin in Treptow-Köpenick, in a small area called Ronsdorf, from the train station. There's a long path through the forest that connects to the next settlement. During the day, it's a peaceful and scenic walk, but at night, especially in winter, most people avoid it. There have been reports of people found seriously injured or worse. Once I came across someone who was severely wounded, with deep cuts across his chest. I called the police and an ambulance immediately. The man was still alive, thankfully. When the authorities arrived and treated him, they asked the usual questions. Had I seen anything strange? Anyone suspicious? I had seen no one. I asked what could have caused wounds that deep. Some even exposed parts of the ribcage. One officer suggested it might have been a sword or an axe. Later, they determined it was likely inflicted by a claymore or a Zweihänder. The idea that someone was attacking people with medieval weapons at night was terrifying. What made it worse was that this time, the attack occurred much closer to the populated area than before. An investigation began, but nothing came of it. Rumors started to spread again. Some say it's the spirit of a Teutonic knight who died in a dishonorable battle in this very forest. It's believed he now haunts the woods, striking down anyone who tries to uncover what happened there. I thought it was just a ghost story to scare children, until I learned that a small battle had indeed taken place there over 900 years ago. During the police investigation, they even found remnants of old weapons and armor. Witnesses who had survived attacks described the assailant as wearing decayed robes and rusted armor with a black cross, the emblem of the Teutonic Knights. Now even adults avoid that path at night. The legend has grown so strong that people truly believe the knight still guards his fallen battlefield. Personally, I don't walk that way after dark anymore. Consider this a warning. If you ever visit Ronsdorf, only explore the forest paths during daylight. It's not worth the risk of meeting whatever, or whoever, is out there with a claymore. Story 15. Maitland Jail is often called the most haunted place in Australia and was reportedly the last location in the country to carry out public hangings. I've been a few times, and every visit included something strange. Once, a heavy metal cell door slammed shut right in front of our group, so suddenly that even the former inmate giving us the tour ran off. One eerie detail you can see for yourself is at the entrance of the jail, where the public executions took place. On the double-pane glass faceplate in the door leading to the stairwell where prisoners were once taken, there's a visible face inside the glass. It only appeared after the final execution. The image is embedded between the glass layers, and you'd have to dismantle a heavy metal door to get inside. It looks almost like it was drawn with soot or smoke, similar to soot artwork made using candle flames. But the creepiest story comes from Cell 4 in C Block, where a prisoner allegedly involved in dark rituals conducted them inside his cell. Occult symbols still remain on the walls to this day. It's said that after forming a pact with sinister forces, the prisoner ended his life by setting himself on fire. The guard responsible for cleaning the aftermath was described as level-headed and family-oriented. Tragically, he was later found in his bathroom at home, having passed away from self-inflicted wounds caused by broken mirror shards. It's said he left a message written in his own blood, claiming he had to take his life to prevent something dark from being unleashed. Reportedly, Cell 4 remains locked to this day. Story 16. In my area, we have abandoned schoolhouses and historical buildings that are said to be haunted. Some of the stories might even be true. I definitely remember creepy experiences at the 100-year-old Catholic school I attended. But the scariest things happened in my childhood home. Growing up, I often felt like I was being watched. I'd see dark figures frequently. One night I saw glowing red eyes staring at me through the window. My parents didn't believe me, thinking I was just being imaginative. But I know what I saw. The guest room in our house always felt off. Even visitors said they couldn't sleep well in there. It's peaceful now. I've cleansed the space many times, and I use it to meditate. The most intense experiences happened when I was a teenager. At 16, I was woken up in the middle of the night by the sensation of someone pushing my shoulder and warm breath near my ear. I was sleeping with my back against the wall, and no one else was in my room. At 18, something similar happened, but this time I felt a cold hand touch the inside of my thigh. Both events occurred around 3 a.m. I told my parents, strangely, my mom, who believes in spirits, didn't believe me, but my usually skeptical dad did. He told me that years before I was born, he was half asleep in bed when he felt something crawl under the covers and touch him. He assumed it was a dream until my mom asked, "Did you feel that too?" Story 17. Here in Liverpool, there are reports of something called time slips, where people suddenly find themselves in the same place. But in the past, it's most commonly reported on Bold Street, but other locations in the city center have had similar claims. One man reported suddenly realizing that everything around him looked different. The buildings, the cars, even the traffic signals. The fashion and vehicles all appeared to be from the 1950s or 60s. Confused, he walked up to a newspaper kiosk and checked the date on the front page. It said 1967. He panicked and tried using his phone, but of course, there was no signal. He wandered around trying to make sense of what had happened. Eventually, his phone reconnected, and he realized he was back in the present. However, when he looked down the street, he could still see part of the area appearing as it had decades ago. There have been several reports like this, all eerily similar. I'm just glad I've never experienced one myself. Story 18. I live in Huntington Beach, California. We have a few urban legends, but the most well-known involves the Bola Chica wetlands, indigenous people, believed to be ancestors of the Chumash, possibly the Hokan, once settled there before Spanish colonization. Archaeologists uncovered a burial mound in the area containing around 100 male skeletons, along with weapons and tools. It's said that if you walk through the wetlands at night, you might hear the sound of hoofbeats all around you, as if horses are circling. Strange floating lights have been reported in the sky, and some people say they've seen ghostly figures walking along the pathways. There's also a related story from my high school. The school had a daycare preschool for the children of staff and students. During renovations of the playground, they unearthed human remains, mostly skull fragments, teeth, some ribs, and finger bones. To be respectful, a Chumash medicine man was brought in to bless the site. Story 19. On Oahu, Hawaii, there's an urban legend we've all heard in elementary school about Nuuanu Pali Road. The story involves a young couple who parked under a tree late at night. They were talking for a while, and when they decided to leave, the car wouldn't start. The boy got out to find help while the girl waited inside. It was a windy night, and all she could hear were tree branches brushing against the roof. Eventually, she fell asleep. When she woke up in the morning, there were police officers outside the car. They told her to exit and instructed her not to look back. But she did, and saw her boyfriend's body hanging from the tree above the car. The sound she had heard all night had not been branches, but his fingertips brushing the roof. It's a chilling tale, though completely fictional. Still, there is some dark history attached to that road. In 1948, a woman was tragically killed there by two escaped prisoners. So while the legend isn't true, the place does carry a real sense of unease. Story 20. There are many legends connected to the mountain range that surrounds my town, but my favorite is the one about the Three Sisters. It's tied to an old dance hall, which was once a fancy venue for wealthy people to attend elegant gatherings. There was once a wealthy man who had 3 daughters whom he loved dearly. When they reached adulthood, he decided it was time for them to marry. To help them find suitable husbands, he built a grand hall where a banquet would be held for that purpose. But no one wanted to marry any of them. The night after the banquet, the 3 sisters took their own lives by hanging themselves on the trees near the house. When their father discovered what had happened, he also took his life out of despair. Legend says that the sisters return at midnight and search for a husband. If a man gets too close to the house at night, They are said to take him back with them to the afterlife. It's more of a tragic tale, but I still think it's pretty creepy. Also, English is not my first language, so there may be small mistakes. Story 21. Decades ago, in the late 1930s or early 1940s, on an especially dark evening, a nun was driving a school bus filled with children home after a field trip. They were heading down Shane Road when the bus suddenly stalled while crossing the train tracks. Most of the children were asleep, so the nun quietly tried to restart the engine. That's when a train appeared out of the darkness. Its headlamp was out, so there was no warning. It was too late to evacuate the children. The nun desperately turned the key one last time, but the train hit the bus, cutting it in half. She was thrown through the windshield and survived, but all the children sadly lost their lives instantly. A few weeks later, overcome with guilt and heartbreak, the nun returned to the accident site. Unable to go on, she parked her car on the tracks and waited. As a train approached, she began to hear small, familiar voices. Then her car slowly started moving forward, as if being pushed. Just in time, it rolled off the tracks before the train passed by. In shock, she got out of the car to look for whoever had helped her, but there was no one around. Then she saw tiny handprints on the trunk of her car. She realized the spirits of the children she lost had returned to save her. Inspired by the event, the nun went on to open a school for orphans and taught there for the rest of her life. It's said that even now, if someone parks on or near the tracks at Shane Road, ghostly children will gently push the vehicle to safety, determined to ensure no one else suffers the same fate they did. Story 22. This isn't exactly an urban legend, but it's no secret that organized crime played a huge role in starting Las Vegas, and many people were taken out to the desert, never to return. During housing booms, it wasn't uncommon for remains to be discovered. There's also the Sierra Triangle, a weather and terrain phenomenon in the Sierra Nevada mountains that has caused hundreds of planes to disappear or crash. Many wrecks were never found, while others were only discovered decades later by hikers or during searches for completely unrelated crashes. Then there are the two lakes surrounded by mystery. First, Pyramid Lake, about 100,000 acres wide, sits in the heart of Paiute land north of Reno. It's roughly 350 feet deep and part of an ancient inland sea. The legend says that unwanted or stillborn children were cast into the lake, and their spirits are responsible for the drownings and disappearances that occur every year. The lake has strong, unpredictable currents, and its underwater terrain is complex. Sadly, not all drowning victims are recovered. The second lake is Tahoe, which sits at the other end of the water system that feeds Pyramid Lake. Tahoe is the second deepest lake in the U.S., with depths reaching 1,600 feet. It's 22 miles long, 12 miles wide, and filled with snowmelt, making it freezing cold year-round. That's why it's rumored to preserve bodies almost perfectly. There are verified cases, like in 2011, when the body of a man who had drowned nearly 20 years earlier was found. Rumors, some reportedly investigated by local journalists and even Jacques Cousteau, suggest that hundreds of Chinese railroad laborers were disposed of in the lake. Rather than pay or properly bury them, it's said the railroad bosses left them in the depths. Due to the cold and depth, their remains were never disturbed. And that's just scratching the surface. Nevada is full of haunted mines, old graveyards, forgotten saloons, ghost towns in places like Bowers Mansion, not to mention the ongoing mystery around Area 51. The West was wild, and it still holds a lot of secrets. Story 23. Lechuzas in Mexico. My grandpa once told me a story from when he was young and living in Mexico. He said his mother asked him to deliver a package to a friend of hers who lived about a half-day's walk away through the woods. So he took his machete and the package and set out on the trip to her house. There were a lot of rumors going around about this lady. Some said she was a witch. My great-grandmother was also known to associate with people like that. After dropping off the package at the woman's house, he turned around to head home, but halfway through his journey back, the sun began to set. As he was walking, a huge owl began flying near him, then directly at him. It kept crashing into him over and over. So he pulled out his machete and swung at it the next time it came close. He heard it fall to the ground and figured he had hit it, so he continued walking home. The next morning, his mom told him he had forgotten part of the package, and he had to go back again. He agreed, made the same trip back through the woods, and arrived once more at the lady's home. When she opened the door, she was missing an arm. He immediately dropped the package and sprinted all the way back home. Story 24. Not sure if this qualifies as a legend, but the facts speak for themselves. There's a house 2 streets over that is widely believed to be haunted. Over the years, people have tried various things to deal with it, but nothing has worked. What's really striking is that nearly all the experts who've been brought in over time came to the exact same conclusion. The entities occupying the place are there precisely because they were exorcised or driven out of other locations. Interestingly, it's a link house, meaning it shares walls with adjoining homes. But none of those neighboring homes have ever experienced anything strange. Also, this is a very valuable area. Not downtown, but a nationally known suburb close to the capital. If it were fake, someone would have moved in long ago. But the house still sits empty to this day. It has permanent for sale banners hanging outside, and it somehow scares off every potential buyer, including quite a few self-proclaimed skeptics who said they'd move in and prove everyone wrong. Every single one has walked away. All of that makes it hard to believe it's just a prank. There has to be something to the stories. Story 25. The Banana Man is the first that comes to mind for me, mainly because I might have actually encountered him. There's an old abandoned railroad track that runs by my parents' house. The village used to be a major coal mining area, so the woods near the tracks are filled with remnants, abandoned coal shafts, small stone buildings, and a tiny windowless brick shack about 6 or 7 square feet in size. The shack belonged to the Banana Man. Legend says that about 50 years ago, a man used to sell bananas and other snacks to the railroad workers and coal miners. One day, a group of young men attacked him. He didn't survive, and it's said they buried him beneath the floorboards of his shack. They were never caught. As kids, we always played around the old tracks and in the surrounding woods. That shack remained untouched throughout my entire childhood. The door was always closed, and no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't open it. It was massive, solid wood on 3 large metal hinges. It didn't even seem locked, just rusted shut. Even with the help of my older brother's friends, 5 teen boys couldn't get it to move an inch. I once shared a story here about a shadowy figure I saw on my parents' porch when I was a kid. I've often wondered if that was the Banana Man. Not long after that incident, we were playing by the tracks and noticed the door to the shack was wide open. Not just open, it had been ripped off the hinges and broken in half. One of the 3 large hinges was completely bent. The floorboards were torn up. We have no idea who managed to get in. We couldn't even unbend one hinge, and someone bent all 3? It was freezing cold inside. I didn't like being in there. It was completely empty except for broken floorboards, the shattered door, and what looked like a collapsed wooden shelf. But the smell is what really stuck with me. It smelled like bananas, old rotting bananas, but very distinctly bananas. One more strange thing. There's 0 cell service near the shack. There's a cell tower not far from it, and everywhere else in the area, service is fine. But within 10 feet of that little shack, no signal at all, no matter which side you're on. Story 26. My local school, one I used to go to, is believed to have once been a morgue and a mental hospital. Back in 2015, a group of students went down to the basement to retrieve something for a teacher from the auditorium. The auditorium itself looks pretty normal. A bit old, but nothing out of the ordinary. However, backstage there's a staircase that leads down to a dark, ominous-looking door. It's pretty much always pitch black down there. Not knowing what was beneath, the students decided to explore. They discovered a closet filled with old medical equipment, not the kind you'd casually find lying around. We're talking about surgical tools like scalpels, strong industrial cleaning agents, and other unsettling items. They also found a room with a door that had a small square window in the middle. They used their phone cameras with flash to take pictures and later showed them around school. A few days afterward, the story spread like wildfire. Some claimed the images they took closely resembled the inside of an old morgue. There was no visible blood or anything, but the metal sliding shelves used to store bodies were clearly visible. I'm not sure what they're officially called. Help me out here. At the time, I was in 6th grade. Now I'm a senior. And I never got to see the photos myself. The pictures were taken by seniors I didn't know, but the story became a chilling legend. What's even more unsettling is that the school never issued any statement about it. Eventually, they blocked off the downstairs area with a gate, and now students are no longer allowed access. Unrelated, but there's another urban legend about our school. People say our principal used to be a dancer at a nightclub. Students jokingly refer to her as Mrs. Skittles, claiming that was her stage name. Story 27. The Claw. An old man went out into the woods one night to gather firewood and never came back. People grew concerned and organized search parties. Eventually, they found his body, which had been badly injured, seemingly by his own chainsaw. Authorities recovered most of the remains, except for one of his hands, which had apparently fallen into a nearby creek. After the funeral, the old man's mother returned home. That night, she heard knocking at the door. When she opened it, no one was there. She closed the door, only to hear knocking again. This time, when she opened it, she found a severed hand on the ground. Terrified, she shut and locked the door and immediately called the police. When they arrived, they found no hand, but they did see what appeared to be long claw marks leading toward the creek in her yard. She didn't sleep at all that night. The knocking continued once the police left, and it never stopped. The next morning, she was found deceased in her home, covered in scratches. The following night, one of the police officers who had been at the scene was working late at the station. He heard knocking at a window, and when he looked outside, he saw nothing but a single hand. He, too, was found dead the next morning. It's said that the claw still roams, using the creeks as pathways to move unseen. Story 28. My whole neighborhood feels like it's cursed. I was born and raised in an area that was once a slave plantation dating back to the 1500s. The land was passed down through generations until my great-grandfather sold most of it, the part that became the town, and kept the beautiful hillside to remain in the family. My father inherited the last remaining corner. The final slave owner on the property was reportedly cruel, while his wife was said to be kind. Though the marriage was not of her choosing, one enslaved man fell in love with her. He would secretly bring her lemons, and she would share lemonade with him behind her husband's back. One day, guests arrived at the plantation, and she served them the lemonade, forgetting to save any for the man. Later, he knocked on the kitchen door to ask if there was any left, but instead, the master answered. In a fit of rage, the master beat the man severely and later punished his wife, accusing her of betrayal. Tragically, she lost a pregnancy shortly afterward, one she hadn't even known about yet. No one knew if the child was her husband's or the enslaved man's. After regaining consciousness, she took her own life, devastated and furious. The master tied the enslaved man to a tree with barbed wire. He lined up the rest of the workers and forced them, one by one, to slice a piece of the man's skin and attach it to the wire along the plantation's border. Some members of my extended family are voodoo practitioners. The elders would teach us children the story of how the neighborhood came to be cursed. They say the spirits of those who suffered still walk the abandoned part of the plantation. Deep in the woods, there's an altar. We go there to offer prayers, hoping the spirits eventually find peace. We leave flowers, fruit, and coffee, and always apologize for the wrongs committed in the past. The most important thing is to ask for forgiveness. Not everyone believes in these traditions. My father didn't. He was a strong non-believer, until he disrespected the altar. As a young man, he and his friends went into the woods and urinated on the altar, maybe to impress someone, or just to defy the elders, I'm not sure. But after that, strange things began happening. Our cars broke down constantly. Our crops died. Though neighbors didn't. Our dogs ran away unless chained and barked all night. This went on for years. Then my mother passed away from sepsis after a particularly harsh hurricane. My father fell into depression and heavy drinking. His health declined until he became deeply unwell. He later remarried a religious woman, and they brought a pastor to bless the house. Meanwhile, I secretly returned to the altar. I cleaned it, left offerings, and continued the prayers. Things slowly began to calm down. But even now, whenever I bring up the story, my father turns pale and refuses to talk about it. Story 29. Edinburgh is an ancient city, almost built on top of itself. We have long underground tunnels that once served as streets centuries ago. Some have collapsed, some have been sealed, and others remain accessible even today. These tunnels have a dark history tied to crime, poverty, and suffering. Over the years, many of the city's most desperate people found shelter in those shadowy spaces. During the era of leprosy outbreaks, one such tunnel was sealed off with infected individuals inside. Whether truly ill or not, the tunnel was bricked over and the city moved on. But for weeks afterward, locals claimed they could still hear the screams of agony and fear echoing from within. When silence finally came, the tunnel was reopened. What they found inside has become legend, disturbing signs of desperation, stories of violence, suffering, and chaos. Some say the echoes of those cries still rise with the wind near the sealed tunnel. Another tale speaks of a forgotten tunnel rediscovered long after. The opening was too narrow for an adult to enter, so the king asked a young boy, an apprentice bagpiper, to go in, playing his pipe so his location could be tracked from above. Locals followed the sound up the Royal Mile until suddenly it stopped. The boy never emerged. They say that if you walk the streets late at night, especially in summer, you can hear faint bagpipes echoing from below the city. I'm not someone who believes easily in ghosts, but coming home from work past 3 a.m. during the Edinburgh Festival, I heard it myself. I brushed it off, assuming it was another late-night musician, but it echoed from beneath the street, faint and eerie, just like the story said. Story 30. Our town has two upper elementary schools, one still in use, and the other sitting abandoned in the center of town, surrounded by maple trees and a neatly kept lawn. Though the building itself is old and unused, the town maintains the grounds to keep up appearances. It's the kind of school building you'd see in a movie. Brick walls, 3 stories, and windows darkened by dust and time. I never went inside, but alumni from previous years had, and they claimed to know why it was closed. The story goes that a young girl plagued by anxiety and sadness reached her breaking point. One day she entered the staff bathroom and locked the door behind her. No one realized she was in there until staff noticed the door had been locked for a long time. When they forced it open, they found her unresponsive. Her hair was wet, as if she had tried to drown herself. Her skin was pale, her lips blue. There was a wound on her head and a small pool of blood near her hands. Though she was given a proper farewell, some say her spirit never found peace. Soon, strange things started happening. Every morning, water would appear on the bathroom floor. Students would feel sudden chills. After school hours, teachers would hear the faint sound of dripping echoing through the empty hallways. They say her spirit still walks those halls. Witnesses describe a figure dressed entirely in white, her long black hair soaked in trailing water wherever she moves. If she sees you, she rushes toward you and grabs you with cold, wet hands. Her eyes are said to be pale and lifeless. And if you look closely, there's a red glimmer in her hair. Once she lets go or vanishes, the dripping starts again. Only this time, from another hallway, those who've had encounters find bloody handprints on their clothes or skin. Understandably, most people now avoid the building altogether. And that's why the old upper elementary school remains abandoned. Story 31. My great-grandfather once worked on a farm deep in the Australian outback. Long ago, a herd of sheep went missing, so the farmer he worked for took a sheepdog and went searching for them. My great-grandfather knew the weather was turning, but for whatever reason, he followed the farmer out into the coming storm, leaving my great-grandmother and their infant child behind. When he finally caught up to the herd, it had begun to rain. The sheep were crowded near a riverbank, the sheepdog barking frantically. My great-grandfather whistled to the farmer, who responded with a whistle of his own. But then the riverbank gave way. Half the herd slipped into the rushing water, along with the farmer and the dog. The river nearly swept away my great-grandfather as well. But he survived. The farmer and the dog were never found. Everyone in the community knew what had happened. My great-grandfather never returned to that river. Years later, when his son, my grandfather, was in school, stories began to spread about the lost dog or river dog. Locals claimed that on windy, rainy nights, you could hear the sound of the farmer's whistle echoing in the distance, followed by the loyal barking of the dog trying to lead the herd to safety. Even as the years passed, students at the school near the river kept the legend alive. When I moved away from the area, The river dog story was still going strong. Story 32. This isn't really an urban legend, more of a personal experience, but it felt incredibly real, even though I was 2 beers in when it happened. Some context: I'm South Asian, near where I live. There's a military cantonment area with large stretches of open land that are off limits to the public. In the middle of that space, there's a hill with a trail leading up to it. Along the trail sits an abandoned abattoir, which earned the place the nickname Beef Hill among my friends and me. We'd go there sometimes to hang out or relax. I'd been there many times before, but only during the day, all except this one time. That night, a friend dropped me off at home after a chill evening. For no real reason, I decided I wanted some quiet time and figured I'd head to Beef Hill for a little late-night reflection. So I walked a couple of kilometers to the trailhead and made my way toward the hill at 1 a.m. The walk through town was peaceful, the streets were quiet, and the breeze felt great. But the trail itself had no lights. So once I got there, I was walking in total darkness. The trail loops behind the old slaughterhouse, where you can still find old animal bones scattered about. I probably stepped over a few without realizing it. As I made my way up the hill, about halfway up, I started getting the distinct feeling that I was being followed. I brushed it off at first, figured maybe it was a stray animal. But then I started hearing footsteps, more than one set, and then I saw them. Wolves. A small group of them had quietly surrounded me. I could hear them growling, low and deep. I froze completely. I was so scared I might have even wet myself a little. I stood rooted to the spot for what felt like half an hour, barely breathing. Then I began slowly backing away, step by step, trying not to panic. They followed me the entire way back down the trail, all the way to the street. As soon as I hit the pavement, I sprinted, but before I took off, I glanced back and saw 2 or 3 of the wolves clearly. They weren't like any wolves I'd ever seen. They were stark white, like Arctic wolves. That doesn't make sense. I live in the tropics, but I know what I saw. I haven't been back to Beef Hill since. My friends think I imagined the whole thing, that it was just alcohol and a bit of paranoia. Maybe it was, but to this day I can still see those pale wolves in my memory. And to me, it felt real. Story 33. This might not be the creepiest story to others, but to me it's deeply personal. It's tied to something that left a lasting impact. The place is Hotel Park Central in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It used to be a hospital for railway employees, and in the 1980s it was converted into a psychiatric hospital for children and adolescents. During that time, I was an outpatient there before receiving my diagnosis for ASD. Like many children there, I experienced mistreatment. The hospital was supposed to help us develop coping tools and emotional stability, but instead of therapy, most of our time was spent singing songs and doing basic art projects. I missed over a month of real school, 4th grade, being treated like a toddler. And whenever a child acted out or got overwhelmed, they didn't offer support. Instead, we were taken to what they called the quiet room. The room was small and stark, white painted brick walls and a cold tile floor. It was next to the children's playroom, and before I was ever taken there, I had already heard the screams of other kids coming from it. So when they dragged me there the first time, I was terrified. I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't want to go in. But to the adults, my fear was just more bad behavior. So 2 or 3 grown adults pinned me down, face first on the floor. I couldn't move. I was crying, screaming, begging them to stop. They only let me go when I had screamed myself into exhaustion. Then they left me alone in that room, with no one to talk to about what had just happened. After that, every time they tried to take me there, I would panic, because I remembered what they did, but they still forced me down, again and again. That room changed me. To this day, I pace when I'm overwhelmed. It started there, where pacing was the only thing I could do to stay calm. I also can't stand being hugged for too long. It triggers a claustrophobic reaction. When I left the hospital, I was worse off than when I went in. Now that I'm older, I know that what they did to us was dangerous. It could have had fatal consequences. That thought both frightens and enrages me. Years later, I found out that the building is rumored to be haunted. Guests and staff have reported feeling watched, hearing whispers, having bed sheets tugged at, and seeing objects move or lights flicker. Some claim to have seen shadowy figures, like a nurse silently watching from the halls, or children appearing in corners, only to vanish. If that quiet room is now part of a hotel room, I hope those staying there still hear echoes, not just of footsteps or voices, but of all the kids who were hurt and never truly healed. I hope it never gets forgotten, because I still remember. Story 34. Aswang in southern Philippines, Cagayan de Oro. This happened in the 1990s. My father and I were watching TV while my brother was brushing his teeth in the kitchen sink. Out of nowhere, my brother saw a large shadow move across the garden tarp outside. He heard a loud tearing sound, and then everything went quiet. A minute later, we heard a faint thud on the roof. We assumed it was just a bird or something. Then the power went out, total blackout. My father's instincts kicked in, and he immediately ran to check on my mother, who was pregnant at the time. He heard movement on the roof and realized it could be an aswang. He yelled for my brother and me to stay with our mother. He grabbed a machete, bolo knife from the closet and went to the fridge to get lemons. He squeezed some on his face and arms, then ran out the back gate to confront whatever was on the roof. He started shouting loudly in Bisaya, saying things like, "Get out of here or else." Maybe it was the shouting, the lemon scent, or the blade in his hand, but the aswang flew away. The next day, I asked my neighborhood friends if they saw anything unusual on our roof. They all said yes. Around 7:30 p.m. that night, they saw a large figure land on our house. A few months later, we moved to New Zealand. Story 35. There's a well-known haunted wooded area in the middle of my suburban hometown called Zombie Road. According to local legend, a serial offender once lived deep in the woods. He would lure victims to his house, where terrible things were said to happen. Eventually, he was caught, but due to a mistrial, he never faced prison time. The road itself is more of a wooded path, less than a mile long, leading to an abandoned house hidden deep in the forest. It became a rite of passage for kids in the area to walk the full length of Zombie Road and see the house for themselves. When I was about 16, I did it with a few friends. We didn't witness anything supernatural, but seeing the house at the end was surreal. I honestly didn't think the house even existed, but it does. That part of the legend is true. Zombie Road is actually pretty well known in the ghost hunting community, so you can probably look it up and find more details. I'm sure I'm missing parts or misremembering distances, but telling the story from personal experience is part of the fun when it comes to local legends. Story 36. The first story is about Alice. She was a young woman from a wealthy family who fell in love with someone her family didn't approve of. He secretly gave her a ring, which she wore on a necklace. When her caretaker and brother discovered it, they sent her away to live in a town 2 hours away. She eventually became ill, likely with malaria, and was brought back home, where she passed away. After her death, her brother found the necklace and threw it into the marsh. She was buried with a plain headstone that simply read, Alice. Legend says if you visit her grave and walk around it 13 times before placing a coin or ring on the stone, Alice will appear. Another version of the story claims she only appears to true lovers who leave a ring or flowers. The second story is about the Gray Man. He was a man who sent his family away ahead of a massive hurricane, but stayed behind to protect their home. He didn't survive the storm. Now, whenever a big hurricane approaches the Georgetown or Grand Strand area, people say they've seen a shadowy gray figure walking along the beach. Seeing him is believed to be a good omen. Not only will you survive the storm, but your home will as well. Story 37. When I was a kid, I attended a school that had been built on top of an old graveyard. Supposedly, all the bodies were removed before construction began, but oddly, they left some of the original tombstones in place. Naturally, people began saying the school was haunted. The layout of the ground floor, and especially the basement, was strange and maze-like. There was an underground gymnasium, and people claimed that was where the ghosts lived. At first, no one really believed the stories, until you found yourself alone in the locker room and heard a door creak open nearby, even though you knew no one else was there. One morning, one of the basement doors was discovered badly damaged. It had been fine the day before, and there was no way to access the school at night. People said it had to be the ghost, Here's a bonus detail. Sometimes kids dared each other to dig around the schoolyard, hoping to find bones since it was once a graveyard. I stayed behind to watch someone actually take the dare, and they found something. Turns out, when the graveyard was relocated, they must have missed a body. Story 38. There's this big, very nice-looking house right across the street from me. It has a large driveway, a small parking lot, and a second story, which none of the other houses on my street have. Apparently, a wealthy family used to live there. A mom, a dad, and a son. According to the story, the son became deeply depressed and sadly took his own life in the driveway. The parents were devastated, understandably so, and eventually decided to sell the house. They were quoted as saying something along the lines of, "This is where our son passed. We can't stay here with all the heavy, painful energy." Later, another family moved in. I don't know much about their family dynamic, but I do know they had a teenage son, maybe 16 or 17, about a year after they moved in. That son also passed away. The details weren't made public, but someone mentioned it might have been due to a car accident. Afterward, this family also sold the house and moved away, just like the previous ones. You're probably sensing a pattern. A family moves in, the son passes away, and the family moves out. Apparently, this pattern has repeated for years. It could be coincidence or exaggeration. The current family has a son too, and he's been fine. They've lived there for 10 years now. So maybe the whole thing really is just an urban myth. Story 39. I grew up in a quiet, modest suburb where not much ever happened, except for a few unfortunate fires that burned down several homes in what's now a more abandoned part of town. That area always had a bit of a creepy vibe, but during the day it was fine. Eventually we started hanging out there. It was right on the edge of the train tracks, and just past them was a big industrial lot. It felt safe in the sense that we almost never saw anyone around. One night, more than 20 years ago, a few of us decided to go biking through the lot after dinner. On the way, we ran into a large police blockade that covered the bike path and the train tracks. There were tons of first responders, patrol cars, and medics. It seemed like something serious had happened. We turned around and started speculating. Our best guess at the time was that maybe a car had gotten stuck on the tracks. But a few weeks later, rumors started circulating, and eventually it became a local urban legend. The story goes that an elderly woman lived near the edge of town, close to one of the burned-down houses. She often babysat her granddaughter. One night, during what was described as a mental health crisis, she took the child by the hand and walked her out onto the train tracks. There she stood with the little girl until a passing train hit them both. It was dark, and the train couldn't stop in time. I've tried to learn more about the case over the years, but this was back in 2000, and information wasn't as easy to find then, especially in a small town like mine. To this day, no one knows for sure if the story's true, but it's one of the most chilling things to have ever been linked to our area. Story 40. In Indiana, there's a bridge known as Dogface Bridge. The story goes that a man and his wife were driving across the bridge when the man swerved to avoid hitting a dog. He struck the dog anyway, and the car went off the edge. During the crash, both the woman and the dog were tragically decapitated. No one seems to know exactly what happened to the man. The bridge has long been abandoned these days. You have to walk nearly a mile just to get there. According to legend, you're supposed to walk across the bridge, and then, on your way back, if you turn around, you'll see a woman with the head of a dog chasing you. If she catches you, she's said to drag you into the river. My brothers and I visited the bridge one night. Nothing happened, other than hearing some dogs barking, which isn't unusual out in the countryside. But while we were there, I had the most intense feeling of déjà vu. I was certain I had been to that bridge before. Even though I know for a fact I hadn't, I'd remember a mile-long walk like that. There's also a tiny cemetery nearby called Teardrop Lane. It's got one road that loops around in the shape of a teardrop. The story is that if you drive to the tip of the loop, shut off your car, and flash your headlights 3 times, a crying woman will appear at the bottom of the loop. I don't know the backstory on that one. I never really looked into it. Then there's Crybaby Bridge, another haunting tale. Legend has it that it's where mothers once abandoned unwanted children. If you drive over it at night, you're supposed to hear the sound of babies crying.